Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church in Jackson, New Jersey, 935 Bennett's Mills Road, the church and school. We'll be providing more information to, more promote the church and lots of stuff to get into today. It's been a little while. We did a show a couple days ago and actually took yesterday off. And one of the things that I wanted to start out by talking about is, trust me, I do appreciate all the interaction. And big thanks to everybody that has contributed to the show, whether it's through the comment feed on Facebook or Twitter or Periscope or on YouTube on demand. Feel free to call in. Number is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Get you right up here. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. A couple different topics we're going to get into today. I do want to put a little closure to the discussion we had the other day in regards to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And it is a little bit of a polarizing topic because of the issues. And I told you, the biggest thing that bothers me about the Baseball Hall of Fame and the way it's constituted and the way it's put together is the fact that it is not giving credit to the best of the best. Now, what we decide to do, the reason it's not as big of an issue as I've made it out to be, and people are not looking at it the same way that I am, is because we go to the polarizing issues and the polarizing topics that exist when we talk about the use of performance-enhancing drugs. If you want to go back further, you talk about the players that gambled and bet on the game and a couple rules. Now, we could argue about steroids being a rule or not being a rule, but the bottom line is people, made those decisions and are being held to the standards of what the penalties are for either doing steroids or being implicated from doing steroids. Now, I respect the dissenting view in this. I respect those that don't agree with my point of view. And I say you have the best of the best in regards to numbers. We got the numbers the way that they're set. The all-time home run leader has 762 home runs. Whether you think they were all done because of the use of performance-enhancing drugs, or you say that some of them were and some of them weren't, he still managed to hit 762 home runs. So in the landscape of the sport, when we're talking about what the sport stands for and what has been accomplished by the best to ever play the sport, what happened. 762 home runs exist. And it's been something that, yes, I'm going to get a dissenting view where a lot of people are going to say that he cheated, so therefore we should ignore the fact that 762 home runs hit by one player exist. Now, if you feel in your mind that baseball is supposed to be this clean game and cheaters, as we view people that use performance-enhancing drugs, should not be enshrined in its Hall of Fame, you have the right to feel that way. It's not going to back me off of my opinion, because baseball does need to be compared to other sports, because it's not the only team sport that exists in this country. And we talk about rotisserie sports fans that exist there that start with baseball, and then they follow football, and then they follow basketball, then they follow hockey. Those are the four major sports in this country. And from the person that loves or is the most passionate about each individual one of those sports, they're going to tell you that that sport is just as important as the next one. Because of that, each sport has its iconic players. We could talk about the 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 greatest pro football players to ever exist and ever play the sport. The same thing we could do with basketball, and the same thing we could do about hockey. What makes the other three sports different than Major League Baseball and in accordance with its Hall of Fame that exists is the fact that every single other of the three major sports have the best of the best the player in hockey that scored the most goals, the player in hockey who has dominated on the ice, defensively, offensively, behind the net, they're all in each one of its respective Hall of Fames. Now, obviously, this is where the dissension exists. This is where the views of many others, differ from the way that I feel. But the first point that I'm going to get into, and I'm just as passionate about this as I am the best of each sport being recognized in its respective Hall of Fames. If you have a Hall of Fame, which in baseball you do, and it's located in Cooperstown, New York. If you have a Hall of Fame and you're going to choose to not, for whatever reason, whether it's because players use performance-enhancing drugs, or players bet on the sport, or were implicated in gambling scandals, every mention and everything that you could use to profit yourself that exists in its Hall of Fame that involves those players needs to be taken out. And you want to say, some people can, that it's two different things. Being enshrined in a Hall of Fame, in my opinion, how does it differ from being included or profited off of in its respective Hall of Fame? When that bat that's sitting there in Cooperstown acknowledges the fact that Barry Bonds hit his 756 home run to break Henry Aaron's record, if that could be in the Hall of Fame, Barry Bonds could be too. And if you've decided for whatever reason, if it's because of steroids, it's because you hate Barry Bonds, it's because any other reason that you want to put it, say that Barry Bonds doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, you need to take that bat and leave it out of the Hall of Fame. Not allow it's people that come to see it in the museum, because according to the standards that you've set as a fan, you've set as the media, or you've set as as baseball writer, that player does not belong. And if that player does not belong, for whatever reason you want to say, that bat should not be there too. That uniform that Pete Rose was wearing when he broke Ty Cobb's all-time hit record should not be in the Hall of Fame. Get it out. If the decision has been made, whether it's by the writers, and obviously the writers have the biggest say in this, but you in a court of public opinion cannot go out there to Cooperstown and get your picture taken next to one of these artifacts. They should not be in the Hall of Fame. And I'll tell you, I'm just as passionate about that as I am the fact that, you know what, the players that put up the best numbers belong in there in the first place. (732-364-3598). That's 732-364-3598. I'm with you till 7 o'clock today. Be back with you next week. We're going to go back to the regular schedule, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. Do have some guests coming up, so the shows next week should be a little more entertaining. Well, maybe not. It all depends on the guest and what the guest brings to the program. But these points I'm going to continue to make, and I do give respect to those that were commenting on the feed yesterday. Kip, Bob. Your opinions are just as important as mine. Unfortunately, in some cases, I don't agree. Now, I do respect the former Major League Baseball player that is adamant about their view on steroids, because it impacts them differently than it impacts me. I'm the talk show host. I'm the baseball historian. Those that played the game and were impacted one way or another by those that use performance-enhancing drugs, if it impacted their job, if it impacted their performance, impacted their ability to stay in the major leagues, that person has every right to be pissed off. That person has every right to want to hold that player out of the Hall of Fame if there's any way that they possibly could. That's a point well taken. Even if it differs in my views on it, I respect that person's every right to feel the way they do. If somebody was juicing and using performance-enhancing drugs, and it was something that other player decided that they weren't going to do under any circumstances, and that cost them a job, and that cost them money, and that cost them a certain length of their playing career, you damn right they should be pissed off. You damn right they should feel the way they do. And one thing I'm surprised that doesn't happen a little more often is that there aren't enough players that are campaigning together against those that use steroids. There's not enough petitions that are out there for harsher penalties. There's not enough petitions out there for the records that exist that were tarnished by those that use performance-enhancing drugs. One thing I don't understand is why more players that were impacted by the use of performance-enhancing drugs aren't bonding together and making more of a stand against it. Not against its existence now, because obviously the amount of usage is certainly down from the way it was in the 90s and the early part of 2000s. But I look at it and I could see a brethren of players that played during the steroids era that know when they look in the mirror, they didn't get anywhere near a steroid or any type of performance enhancer. And looked at their lives and think about how their lives could be different if the game was clean the entire time. So how could you not have empathy for that person? I mean, you can look at whatever job it is that you have, and you can think of some kind of scenario where somebody can unfairly take your job or tarnish your image in a job that you have and love. It's called cheating for a reason. So I may sound like a little bit, I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, but I respect those that decided to play the game clean. I respect those that even in the biggest of peer pressure situations or the when it was a choice that they could have taken, either use this and continue to play or not use this and let your career wind down. I respect the person that stood up and said that I'm not going to cheat. And for those that did, I'd hate to say it, there's some scenarios where players probably weren't as wrong as some others. And I keep looking at the Paul LaDuca argument, saying that a group of players that are watching themselves as they're performing at AAA, being passed up by players they know are taking steroids. And as their minor league careers are winding down, and as they're making $4,000 or $5,000 a year, yes, $4,000 to $5,000 a year for playing minor league baseball. And they know that everything isn't on the level in regards to the steroids that are running rampant in the game. And they're going to watch the person with half as much talent as they have go right past them and go into the major leagues where the minimum salary is $500-something thousand a year. Once again, $4,000 to $5,000 a year is what your average minor league baseball player makes. How do you support a family on that? And you think nature just naturally, going through the process, you'll get the opportunity, but all of a sudden there's a wall there. And it's not a wall based on your own talent. It's about the choices that others are making. And those choices are impacting you, your livelihood, and your future. So if you're going to tell me that a player that's in that situation that decides to start using, is that wrong? They aren't. Yes, they succumb in that situation to being a cheater. And in the court of public opinion, they're judged in the same category as those that chose to use performance-enhancing drugs all along. And once again, it's a wishy-washy situation because there's no way to tell what each individual's path was to get there. Alex Rodriguez, was he using from day one? We'll never know. Mark McGwire, was he always using? Once again, it's the court of public opinion, which is all hearsay. We know that. It's what I said against what somebody else said. So once again, we talk about the news that we have in this country, which is based about 90-something% off of opinion as opposed to facts. And you're just picking what story you like better. And as I twist this into the circle and kind of come back to where I started, the baseball writers are choosing which ones of these stories they want to believe. And if the voting process was that simple, and if it was just based off of the players that used and the players that didn't use steroids, and the ones that used steroids were not going to be selected in its Hall of Fame, and the ones that did not use would have the opportunity to get selected in its Hall of Fame, it will be a little bit easier to understand. But unfortunately, it's way more complicated than that. You have Jose Canseco's book, which Jose Canseco, from a trusting standpoint or a trustworthy standpoint, seems like somebody that you would not want to take his word. Yet he writes a book about all those that he's calling out for the use of performance-enhancing drugs. And the Mitchell report comes, and all of a sudden leaks start to happen and players start to get implicated. Congress calls a bunch of players, to sit there and talk under oath. Some of them possibly perjured themselves. But all of a sudden, it seems like a lot of what Jose Canseco had said in his book seems to be true. So you're looking at a guy that wasn't trusted, writing a book and having a lot of what he said in the book being backed up. Now do you all of a sudden trust this previously untrustworthy person? Because if you do, there are players in the Baseball Hall of Fame that are in his book. But once again, it's a matter of whose opinion do you want to take more, as opposed to nothing that has been proven in fact. It's all hearsay. Jose Canseco looks good when he writes his book, and a lot of players in the book, including his good friend Mark McGwire, admit to the use of performance-enhancing drugs. Backs a lot of what he says. Alex Rodriguez admits it. He's in Jose Canseco's book. Other players admit it, but admit not knowing what they were taking. I didn't knowingly take this. I put this cream on my legs. Didn't know until after the fact that it contained steroids or was an anabolic steroid. So the problem with this, and the issue that I have with those that are so adamant about don't let this player in, don't let that player in, the issue is we're never going to know for sure. And baseball did such a lousy job, particularly in the 1990s, that they deserve their share of responsibility for this mess. Dave joins the program. Dave, what's going on?
Hey, how are you?
All right, man. How you doing?
I'm pretty
Because it said your name on the caller ID.
Oh, shit. What's up? What are you doing?
No, man, just doing a show. What's on your mind?
Oh, good. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question about something. My father, right, he has a lot of cards for a guy that just got picked for the Hall of Fame thing. Does that affect the value of his card at all?
It will allow for the value of the card to go up a little bit.
Okay.
But, if you got, let's say, an autograph for him now,
yes.
As he's a Hall of Famer, he would put like the insignia of HOF under it.
Oh, is that right?
So the value of, let's say, a baseball that was signed by, let's say, a Jim Thome or a Chipper Jones, after they got elected in the Hall of Fame, they could put HOF on it, which will increase the value a lot. So something that you got signed, let's say today, will be worth a lot more than it was, if you got it before today.
Interesting.
But let's say if you had cards, if you had just regular cards, of the player, that the value would go up a little bit. If it was a signed card, their autograph will be worth a little more. But if they put HOF on it,
cards aren't worth what they used to be in general, I feel like, anyway.
Yeah, they've been going down.
Are you on here?
Yeah, we're live, brother.
Wow.
All right, man. Anything else?
Hey, no, that's it. I just wanted to also you just doing a good job over there, Johnny.
Hey, thanks a lot, Dave. I really appreciate the call, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Take it easy.
Right, yeah, and once again, in regards to anybody that is an autograph collector, somebody that gets elected in the Hall of Fame, all of a sudden, they're able to put HOF on it. That increases the value. So, there's going to be a lot of card collectors that are going to be sending, cards and stuff like that to residences of Jim Thome and Chipper Jones and Trevor Hoffman and, even Alan Trammell and, Vladimir Guerrero and Jack Morris. I mean, their autographs are going to be worth more now that they're in the Hall of Fame. Their autographs before, yes, they're going to go up a little bit, but you put HOF on it, it increases the value a lot. And obviously a lot of the card collectors and autograph seekers and, people that collect memorabilia know that already. Once again, 732-364-3598, 732-364-3598. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unified America. But let me finish this conversation in regards to, the perception that somebody cheated, because I think that's different than knowing it for a fact. If somebody fails a drug test, yeah, sure, you could go through a loophole if that person wants to deny it and say that the test was rigged like a Ryan Braun, or wants to go after a teammate to say they took a supplement that they didn't know and it was the fault of the teammate, like Rafael Palmeiro blaming Miguel Tejada. That's just different cases of lying. Somebody could commit murder, but then they deny it and they're found guilty in a court of law, they're a murderer. But somebody that claims to not use performance-enhancing drugs, you fail a drug test, you used it. So that's different. But we talk about, and I want to throw out a name like Ivan Rodriguez, because Ivan Rodriguez was elected into baseball's Hall of Fame this time last year. Jose Canseco was a former teammate of Ivan Rodriguez and claims in his book that he used performance-enhancing drugs. Now, that's a claim, that's hearsay. It's not a fact. Ivan Rodriguez could say, no, I did not use it, and Jose Canseco was lying, and then once again, he said, she said, it's one person's word against the next person's word. But if we're playing the game of reasonable doubt, reasonable doubt exists on both sides. If you want to say that, perhaps he may have used, somebody may say by the eye test they think that he used. Well, there's reasonable doubt because there was no proof that he definitely did. Ivan Rodriguez did not, said that he did not use performance-enhancing drugs. So there is reasonable doubt that exists. If he admitted it, it would be one thing. Was there a failed drug test? No. There's no failed drug test on record that says that Ivan Rodriguez, tested positive for the use of steroids. But the other side of it is there have been claims, mainly Jose Canseco's book. Now, we could use the writer's eye test, which is something that I don't like because I don't think it's fair. Frank Thomas was a big man. Jim Thome was a big man. Neither of these players had any sort of ties to the use of performance-enhancing drugs. So they get the benefit of the doubt. But somebody like a Jeff Bagwell, who never failed a drug test, was never implicated with any signs of the use of performance-enhancing drugs, but according to the same baseball writers or some other people, fails the quote-unquote eye test, looks like he could have been a user, has doubt cast on the legitimacy of what he did. But Jeff Bagwell's in the Hall of Fame. There's other players that played in that era. And I'll tell you, the one part of the baseball writers' vote that I respect, and I respect it more than anything, is those that chose to not vote for anybody that played in that era. Because at least you're taking a stand and you're saying, I'm going to dismiss the entire era. And in some cases, people were dismissing the entire era because you could not tell who was using and who was not using. So at the risk of voting somebody in that used performance-enhancing drugs, even though there was no proof to prove either way, the writers that choose to not vote for anybody that played in that era, I respect them more than those who want to pick and choose in their own mind based off of their eyesight, which in their case is like, it is beyond 20/20, and they know right off the bat who used by looking at them because they're so superior than anybody else. I would rather somebody not vote for anybody in an entire generation or an entire time during the steroid era. And what I'd like to see, to throw some more egg in the face of a lot of baseball writers who are very hypocritical. Halfway point here in the Passball Show. Once again, John Pielli with you. Passball Show brought to you by St. Aloysius Church, located on 935 Bennetts Mills Road in Jackson. Church and school. I believe they have kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. 732-364-3598. Want to be part of the program, anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. We spoke earlier in the week about the XFL, which Vince McMahon is looking to bring back. And I think there's still a lot of work that has to be done to this. And I know, the reaction was, from his announcement, oh my God, it's going to compete with the NFL. Some people that are happy with the NFL think that it's got no chance. Some people that are not happy with the NFL are thinking about the possibility of the XFL possibly competing with the likes of the NFL. And I find it fascinating for this reason, because I think there are some reasons, whether they're political driven or just the average sports fan that's upset with pace of play in all of sports. And I tell you, this is a legitimate issue. This is an issue that doesn't get spoken about enough. We think of the NFL and we talk about polarizing issues with the NFL and reasons that ratings are down, and we automatically want to tie it to the national anthem and everything that is brought about in it in regards to players protesting and any sort of politics being put in the game. And we want to think that that's the number one reason that ratings are down in the NFL. Some of it does have to do with the pace of play that exists in the NFL. We talk about it, how it applies to baseball. How there should be a pitch clock. Batters shouldn't step out. Catchers shouldn't go to the mound 100 times each inning. Commercial breaks shouldn't be 5 minutes long. But have we watched your typical football game? Commercial breaks like none other, because sponsors want to get their airtime, because they're given that amount of money to the NFL. It's part of the reason that the NFL is a billion-dollar industry and is the most profitable out of the four major sports. So, God forbid we cut down commercial time. God forbid we don't go to commercial after every stoppage of play. Guy scores a touchdown. We gotta watch. We go right to the commercial. We come back. We verify it's a touchdown. Go to another commercial. Come back. The kickoff goes into the end zone. A touchback. Go to another commercial. God forbid anybody would ever want to take away the money that this league is making. God forbid little Johnny Q 30-second spot doesn't get played 8 times a game. That's okay because the league's making money. But if you're a fan and you're bothered by watching a 3.5, 4-hour game, which is the direction the NFL is going into, you watch your typical primetime game, which starts at about 4:30, and you're talking about 8:30 Eastern time when these games are starting to end. A lot of it has to do with the commercials, but also a lot of it has to do with the replay and the verifications, which, by the way, we're not even getting the calls right a lot of the times. We still have this weird rule in regards to what a catch was. As we sit here in 2018, pro football has existed for going on 100 years. And we still don't know what a catch is. It's something, first of all, the league's got to figure out. And if they want to stick with the judgment in regards to what the rule is right now, they better enforce it 100% of the time. So we have rules that still the average football fan, the average good football fan, the average passionate football fan that knows what he's talking about doesn't understand. And now we have replay, which isn't just enforced by the choice of the coaches in regards to the challenges. It's enforced by the officials within the last 2 minutes. So if you used your challenge, it doesn't matter. If it's a controversial play, it's getting reviewed by the booth. Every scoring play, every turnover, automatically reviewed. And it would be one thing if it was making sure that these calls were correct. But some cases, we're talking about interpretations of the rules, which are going both ways. It should be cut and dry. We should know exactly what the rule is, and when the review is going on, that expert, whether it's a Mike Pereira or whoever CBS is deciding to use, can tell you this is the rule, it's going to get overturned, or this is the rule, the play is going to stand. And if that's the case, these reviewing processes will be a lot quicker. It should be more cut and dry, and it's not. And that's on the National Football League. Straighten out your rules. Make sure everybody's on board. And that will reduce the review time and set certain guidelines for what should constitute a review. Maybe every single scoring play doesn't need to go up to the booth. Maybe there's some plays that are a little easier to judge, and it should be called on the field, and that call should be absolute and irreversible. The length of your average National Football League game is an issue, and it is impacting fans that are watching. Fans are turning away because there's action on the field. And in some cases, there's a lot more non-action than action. sponsors are forking over their money to the NFL, who can't wait to collect it. And you got to make sure that those commercials run every single time. And I know as the Super Bowl is coming up next Sunday, we can't wait. Or there's a faction, whether it's a third or a half or whatever, people that watch the Super Bowl because they can't wait for the commercials. And I understand the Super Bowl is different because, you know what? That's a gathering. That's a holiday, per se. Everybody's got their get-together. And they're enjoying themselves. So if the game goes a little longer for Super Bowl Sunday than a normal football game, it's accepted by most. But I'm talking about the average NFL game, which is taking a lot longer. And I'll tell you, if the XFL can find a way to shorten the game, can find a way to look at the deficiencies of the National Football League, which there's a lot of them. A lot of it has to do with the length of the game. A lot of it has to do with replay. Maybe you set up to where there is no replay, and you trust the officials on the field to make a call. And you say their call is exactly the way the play is going to go. Now you want to say, all right, well, can gamblers get involved in it? Sure. But in order for gamblers to determine the outcome of the game, you need to have people stupid enough to bet on it. If there's anybody that's going to bet on an XFL game, they deserve to be scammed. So if we're talking about the integrity or the game being played on a level, well, it pretty much should. Because the only person that's going to lose money is an idiot in the first place. If you're that much of a degenerate gambler that you're going to fork over, hundreds or thousands of dollars on an XFL game in 2020, is anybody supposed to feel sorry for you if you lose your money? Now, it does make it interesting because the XFL could do one of two things. Or actually, it could do one of three things. The first one is the obvious one. Spend a little time existing and fail and fold. That's number one. Number two, it could become, over time, competition to the NFL. And the only way that the XFL becomes anywhere close to competition of the National Football League is if they're able to keep a product on the field that, number one, is competitive, number two, is worth watching, and number three, can somehow find a way to get NFL players to play in their league. Now, the best way for it to happen, I suggested a couple days ago, was start with players that are in the NFL that aren't getting the opportunity. You start with that third-string quarterback, the Davis Webb, the Christian Hackenberg, and get them to buy in. But not only get them to buy in, but to discover their unforeseen talent. The talent that got them to the NFL in the first place. The talent that they're not able to use on the field because they're holding a clipboard and are not being dressed for all 16 games during the regular season. And get that first quarterback that's not getting the opportunity in the NFL to succeed in the XFL. Pretty similar to that of a Tommy Maddox. Somebody to go in there and, wants to play because they want to play football. They don't want to be a backup. They don't want to be a third-string quarterback. They don't want to be inactive for 16 weeks. So they take you up on the offer. And they go out there and they perform. They draw attention to themselves. Stories are being put out about the performance of this one player or this group of players. And all of a sudden, the level of competition in the league gets better because other third-string quarterbacks and backup running backs and, defensive tackles that are only getting in a couple plays a game, or cornerbacks and wide receivers that are only playing special teams in the NFL. They say, listen, rather than playing special teams, I'd like a chance to catch 10 balls a game. I want a chance to showcase myself. So for all those that are saying that the XFL cannot succeed, there's a chance. Obviously, the chance will be contingent on everything I said working. But the NFL does have some issues. You give me a game that has no politics involved whatsoever. You give me a game that's accepting of everybody. You give me a game in the XFL that has more black coaches than white coaches. That's going to make a stand. Because the NFL isn't doing that right now. For whatever reason. You could say the Rooney Rule's failing. You could just say that maybe, that solid black head coach just isn't getting his opportunity. But what if he gets his opportunity in the XFL and shows what he could do? Or what if you have 8 teams and 7 of the 8 teams have a black head coach? What does that say to all other potential black head coaches? I'm going to get an opportunity in the XFL when I wasn't in the NFL. And once again, there's no explanation. It is inexcusable, the fact that there are so few black head coaches in the National Football League. For the percentage of black players that are playing on every given Sunday, there should be a way higher percentage of black head coaches. So if you're asking me to explain it, I can't. It's inexcusable. It's unexplainable. But there are legitimate things that go on in the NFL that make players unhappy, make coaches unhappy, make fan bases unhappy. And there's certain things going on in the NFL that have driven fans to not want to watch the sport. They may be football fans, but they may be so disgusted for whatever reason, they're not tuning in. So if they get an opportunity to see something else that could be a potential competition to the National Football League, they're going to be curious. Now, I'm not saying they're going to watch XFL games over NFL games. But they're going to be curious enough to take a look at it. The other scenario I want to talk about, we talked about just having a couple minutes in the sun and folding. Talked about being competition to the National Football League. But the other one is to be a potential developmental league to the NFL. Which there's leagues starting and having some success in the NBA. The National Hockey League has a minor league system. Major League Baseball has several levels of minor leagues. National Football League doesn't have a place for somebody to go when you want them to play competitively, but don't think they're ready for the NFL at this moment. You look at the possibility of being on a practice squad. A practice squad allows for you to go out there and compete during the week, to play football, but not actually play in a game. If the XFL can provide an opportunity for players that may not be ready or may need a little more work to play competitively, improve, and set themselves up for an opportunity to get noticed by an NFL team, then that could work. Because once again, baseball's got its layers upon layers of minor league, teams and leagues. The NHL's got it too. The NBA is growing, towards more developmental leagues. Some of the best players to ever play in baseball spent many years in the minor leagues, and they improved. You could say that I've spent 8 years broadcasting. And I'll tell you, if you listen to something from 2011 or 2012, I promise you the quality of what I'm giving you right now is better than it was then. The NFL can use a developmental league. Now, I don't know if Vince McMahon and those that are running the XFL will be interested in doing it that way. And that may be something that could develop over time. It goes out there, gives the best that it can, but from a profit standpoint, can make some money being a developmental league of the NFL, then maybe it could work. And I'm not rooting against it. I'm actually more intrigued by the XFL. Not because of Vince McMahon, not because of the XFL as we saw it, in 2000, when it was a complete and utter failure. It was an embarrassment. But I think it's interesting enough to see if the league can exist, not necessarily as competition to the NFL, but can work alongside it and maybe help the NFL. Because I'll tell you, the one thing that the XFL did that was positive is it provided different ideas that the NFL was not looking at. And many organizations started implementing things. TV networks started using different type of camera angles that didn't exist in the NFL before. So we talk about business as it's set. The NFL obviously owns what would be considered a monopoly on pro football in the United States. Another thing that I think would be interesting, we talk about the NFL being a regional game, a major market game. I'm sure there's a lot of places in the country that have passionate football fans, but aren't near an NFL city. And if you could talk about certain areas of the Midwest past Wisconsin, Montana, South Dakota, you look at Oklahoma, you look at SEC town where college football runs rampant. You obviously see that passion exists amongst fan bases in different areas. And yes, generally they're going to be fans of certain teams. You got the national teams like the Steelers and the Cowboys. And of course the Patriots are growing their national fan base. Because that's what happens when you win. You talk about generations or a couple generations of Steeler and Cowboy fans like they're both America's team as if they always were. The reason they became more national is because they won, and fans decided to be front runners and root for the team that won. It's happening with the Patriots now. Over time, it's going to happen with whatever that next big NFL team that goes out there and wins a bunch of Super Bowls. It could be the Jacksonville Jaguars. It could be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let them have success over a 10 and 12 and 15 year period. And I promise you, there's going to be a whole generation of national fans that are going to follow that team. The Miami Dolphins have a fairly national fan base, especially up here in the Northeast. You wonder why. Why are there Miami Dolphin fans, or why are there a lot of Miami Dolphin fans out here? Because they had some success in the 1970s. And there were young kids, and in some cases adults that weren't following football, all of a sudden started to follow football, and they're like, I'm going to go root for whatever team is winning and dominant at this time. And that's how a generation of Miami Dolphin fans were born. The same time, a generation of Pittsburgh Steelers fans were born. And a generation of Dallas Cowboys fans were born. And what happens? Early part of 2000s. Bill Belichick, Tom Brady lead the Patriots to a win over the St. Louis Rams, a team that was favored, by the way. They had won the Super Bowl the year before. A team with Kurt Warner. Mike Martz is the head coach. Dick Vermeil won the Super Bowl the year before and retired. So the Patriots win that year. They win 2 of the next 3 Super Bowls. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of football fans that either aren't following the sport, that decide to watch, and they're like, hey, I like football. I haven't picked the team yet. Well, how about the team that won the Super Bowl 3 of the last 4 years? All right, I'm a Patriots fan now. And they follow the Patriots. They have children. Those children grow into Patriots fans. And there you go. You have national Patriots fans that exist all over the country. The same thing will happen anywhere with any pro football team. The only thing they need to do is have a little bit more than sustained success. Be the dominant team of the generation. How many San Francisco 49er fans were born in the 1990s? Or were kids in the 1990s? Or had fathers that all of a sudden brought home a San Francisco 49er jersey and said, listen, I'm rooting for this team. This is my team. But we'll never admit, and this is the problem with sports, the problem with football. You can be a fan of any team that you want. Just be honest with the reason that you became a fan of it. I mean, I'm a New York Mets fan. And I was young enough. I was 6 years old. I didn't remember the 1986 World Series. But something came along me at some point, and I know I didn't intend to do it. But the little kid in me kind of gravitated towards the 1986 World Series championship with the New York Mets. And it was just one championship. It was one World Series, one that, as a fan, I haven't seen since. But at least I'm grown enough to admit that had something to do, some bearing on me being a New York Mets fan. There are plenty of people all across the country that followed the New York Yankees winning a World Series in 1996, 1998, 1999, and 2000. And they were just getting involved in the game. Either they were fans of other sports or weren't sports fans and decided to start following baseball and kind of liked what the Yankees were doing. Or you were a kid growing up at that time thinking it was pretty cool. But just admit the reason you became a fan. Nobody is going to become a national fan of somebody or a team that stinks. You know, is there a reason why there aren't a ton of national Detroit Lions fans? Or a ton of New York Jets fans that aren't outside the tri-state area? Do you think that, you know, the Milwaukee Brewers don't have a ton of fans that are, you know, national? Fans in Florida, fans in New York, fans in California that coincidentally just aren't transplants? Why does that exist? Why are there not national fans of those teams? It's because they haven't dominated the sport for a series of years. They didn't have their moment of the Steelers or the Cowboys of the 70s, or the Cowboys of the 90s, or the 49ers of the 90s, or the Yankees starting in the 30s, and the 40s and the 50s, and the 70s and the 90s. There was a lot of time to jump on the New York Yankees bandwagon. It just depended on what type of domination or dynasty that they were on. But I'll close it with this. Your national sports fans jumped on the bandwagon at some point. Now, are they loyal enough? You know, are those Miami Heat fans that watched the Heat get to the NBA Finals 4 years in a row with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, winning 2 NBA Finals? Are those fans that jumped on that bandwagon, are they still loyal to the Heat today? I'm sure a lot of them are. And it doesn't make them a bandwagon fan right now because they are interested when LeBron James ain't playing for them anymore, leading them to 4 straight finals. But don't lose track of your roots. Don't lose track of the reason that you became a fan. And I'll tell you this, there's nothing wrong with admitting that you decided to get aboard when the team was having success. Now, it doesn't apply to all fans. It applies to some. But I would say a good enough amount of fans. And I'll tell you, the majority of national fans, and this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about regional fans. Because if you're from South Jersey and you root for Philadelphia sports teams, I know where you got your heritage from. You know, if you're from, northern New Jersey or New York City and you root for 4 major New York sports teams, I get it. If you're right out on the side of, Cobb County, Georgia, and you root for the Atlanta Braves and the Atlanta Falcons, I get it. If you're born and raised in LA and you love the Lakers, I get it. But what about those national Laker fans? What about those Celtic fans that exist throughout the country? Just take a moment to remember where you came from. The Boston Celtic fan, that's their second generation, that's just having children now, that's raising them to be Celtic fans, could talk about their father being a fan in the 50s and 60s. Watching Bill Russell win 11 NBA championships in 13 years. And listen, they still love their dad. They made them a Celtic fan and they enjoy being a Celtic fan. But take a moment to admit that dad jumped on the bandwagon when the Celtics were winning 11 championships